crop circle researchers finally recorded a formation happening in real time. One researcher described what happened as an event that rewrites how we understand atmospheric physics. The footage, still being analyzed by multiple scientific teams, shows what appears to be a complex Celtic knot design materializing in mere seconds. This isn't just another discovery of an already formed pattern.
They appear overnight in silence, perfect, intricate patterns carved into vast fields of wheat, barley, and canola. Some call them art, others call them hoaxes, and a few believe they're messages from something far beyond our world.
A faint, luminous corona glow hovering over the field just before formation. This glowing phenomenon aligns precisely with what physicist Terence Meaden has predicted in his plasma vortex theory, where charged columns of ionized air could create such patterns. The drone's thermal sensors detected something else remarkable: a brief burst of localized heat at the moment of formation, followed by immediate cooling. It's as if something released a concentrated pulse of energy and then vanished.
But what if the truth isn't so easily dismissed? What if beneath the soil and inside the crops themselves, there's hard evidence that defies every explanation we've been given? This isn't just about shapes in a field, it's about how far we're willing to go to avoid asking the questions that really matter. It's a strange thing to imagine, waking up one morning and finding a perfectly circular pattern, dozens of feet across, pressed into a quiet field of wheat or barley. For some, it's just a peculiar sight. For others, it's a mystery that demands an answer. These curious formations, widely known as crop circles, have been appearing across the world for centuries. Reports date as far back as the 16th century, though the phenomenon, as we recognize it today, didn't gain real momentum until the late 1970s and exploded into public consciousness by the 1980s. To date, well over 20,000 crop circles have been documented, with the highest concentration found in the rural farmlands of southern England, particularly Wiltshire. These designs range from simple circles to highly complex geometric patterns, sometimes spanning the length of a football field. Yet these shapes aren't confined to British soil. They've been seen in fields across Europe, North America, Asia, and even Australia. The mystery has grown far beyond the physical marks in the crops themselves, raising questions that have been asked again and again for decades. Who, or what, is making them, and why? For a long time, the answer seemed obvious to many. The complexity and scale of the formations, along with their sudden appearance overnight, led people to believe something extraordinary was going on. These were not random accidents caused by the weather or animals. They appeared deliberate, intricate, and precise. This gave rise to one of the most well-known theories, that crop circles were being created by extraterrestrial intelligence attempting to communicate with humans. By the early 1980s, media reports on crop circles were no longer just local curiosities. They had become the subject of global interest. UFO researchers, authors, television specials, and entire communities of believers focused intensely on these shapes, debating whether they contained coded messages, alien language, or even blueprints for futuristic technologies. Some believed the patterns were tied to sightings of unidentified flying objects. Others thought they might contain warnings about environmental collapse or upcoming astronomical events. The mystery deepened with every new formation. Then, in 1991, something happened that seemed to explain it all, or at least so many people thought. Two men from Southampton, England, Doug Bauer and Dave Chorley, stepped forward and claimed responsibility for the entire crop circle phenomenon. At the time, Bauer was 67 years old and Chorley was 62. They admitted to creating the formations themselves starting in the late 1970s, saying it all began as a bit of fun and a way to confuse the public. Their method was surprisingly simple. All they needed were a few wooden planks, some rope, and a lot of patience. The two would head out into the fields under the cover of darkness. With a rope fixed to an anchor point, they used their planks to flatten the crops by walking in a circular motion, measuring carefully, and using string to maintain accuracy. The result? A neat, near-perfect circle. What started as a casual prank quickly caught the attention of the press and public. Bauer and Chorley were stunned by how quickly others picked up on the idea and started copying them. As the crop circles grew in complexity and number, the pair realized they had unintentionally launched a phenomenon that was now far beyond their control. They watched as people began attributing their handiwork to aliens, supernatural forces, and secret military experiments. Eventually, Bauer and Chorley decided to go public. Concerned about the growing obsession and misinformation surrounding the circles, they contacted a British newspaper to confess. They not only shared their story but demonstrated their technique to journalists and even managed to fool a few investigators in the process. To strengthen their claim, they presented a collection of over 200 hand-drawn designs they had kept over the years, stored in a shed on Bauer's property. Many of the designs were faded and aged, lending credibility to the idea that they had indeed been active for years. The confession was a bombshell. It shook the community of crop circle believers, forced scientists and researchers to rethink their positions, and seemed to offer a tidy resolution to a long-running mystery. If two men with a wooden board and some rope could create convincing crop circles, then perhaps all of them, regardless of how large or complex, could be explained as nothing more than elaborate pranks. Still, not everyone was convinced. One of the most prominent figures in the study of crop circles at the time was Pat Delgado, a former NASA engineer and co-author of several books on the subject. Delgado had been investigating crop circles for years and was firmly of the belief that they were created by non-human forces. The newspaper that published Bauer and Chorley's confession arranged for Delgado to meet the pair in person. Together, they visited one of the recent formations. Delgado was stunned. Not only had the two men been present at many of the sites he had investigated in the past, something that suddenly made sense in hindsight, but they also had knowledge of the patterns that closely matched what he had previously believed to be unexplainable. While some investigators remained skeptical of the hoax explanation, Delgado began to accept that he had likely been fooled. Bauer and Chorley weren't done, however. After their confession, they created a group known as the Circle Makers and turned what began as a prank into an artistic pursuit. They brought new members into the fold, trained them in the technique, and continued to create crop circles as a form of performance art. Their creations evolved in both scale and intricacy, often pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible with simple tools and teamwork. According to them, their goal wasn't to mislead or mock people, but to explore the power of anonymous art and its ability to provoke thought, belief, and wonder. Still, they expressed concern about how widespread copycat formations had become, especially as some people tried to profit off the mystery by charging for tours or selling merchandise. For Bauer and Chorley, the fun of it all was rooted in mystery, not money. In the eyes of many, the mystery of crop circles was now solved. They were man-made, the product of creativity and skill rather than alien visitors. The media largely embraced this explanation, and public interest began to wane slightly as the aura of the unknown was stripped away. Articles from sources like JSTOR Daily and Live Science confidently stated that crop circles were hoaxes, full stop. The case was closed, but not everyone accepted that conclusion. For some, the confession raised as many questions as it answered. If crop circles were all man-made, then how did Bauer and Chorley, or anyone else, manage to create some of the most complex designs that appeared overnight with no witnesses? How could such large-scale formations be completed with perfect symmetry under the cover of darkness, often without leaving a single footprint or sign of entry? And what about the reports of crop circles appearing in parts of the world where the duo had never set foot? As Bauer and Chorley aged and eventually stepped back from the public eye, other groups took up the mantle. Many admitted to creating their own crop circles using similar techniques, and some went on to become professional artists in their own right. Yet, even with so many hoaxes exposed and recreated under controlled conditions, a lingering doubt remained. The phenomenon, it seemed, could not be reduced to a single explanation. While Bauer and Chorley's story accounted for many of the early crop circles, it didn't necessarily explain all of them. And as the years went on, new formations began to emerge that were even more elaborate, intricate, and in some cases, downright baffling. Some formations stretched for hundreds of feet and contained nested shapes, complex fractals, and precise mathematical ratios. These were not the kinds of designs that could be easily produced by two people in the middle of the night using boards and string. They required planning, execution, and an understanding of geometry that went well beyond the original hoaxer's abilities. Moreover, several farmers reported formations appearing in their fields almost instantly, with no signs of human entry or disturbance. In one case, a farmer claimed he had checked his field late in the evening and returned just a few hours later to find a massive design fully formed. The ground was undisturbed, the crops were flattened, but not broken, and no one had heard or seen a thing. To be fair, eyewitness accounts are not always reliable. Memory is fallible, and people are prone to suggestion, especially in the face of mysterious or unexplained events. But these reports added fuel to the fire for those who believed there was more to the story. The confession by Bauer and Chorley marked a turning point in the crop circle narrative. But it wasn't the end. It served as a wake-up call, a reminder that not everything unexplained is necessarily extraordinary, and that human creativity is often underestimated. But it also left open a question that persists to this day. Even if most crop circles are hoaxes, does that mean all of them are? And if not, then what are we really dealing with? In the years that followed, researchers began to shift focus. Rather than simply asking who was making the crop circles, they began to look more closely at how the formations affected the crops themselves. Were there physical signs that could distinguish hoaxed circles from something else? Could science offer a deeper explanation? What they found, in some cases, was more puzzling than anyone had anticipated. But that's a story for another part. Even with the 1991 confession that explained the origins of many early crop circles, debate has continued. For many in the scientific and academic world, the story seemed wrapped up. Crop circles were man-made, case closed. But as time went on and more formations appeared, many of them far more advanced than anything Bauer and Chorley had created, questions remained. Could every crop circle really be attributed to human hoaxers? No. Or were there still formations that didn't quite fit the mold? When media outlets and researchers speak confidently about crop circles being a solved mystery, they often rely on well-known facts. Human-made crop circles have been observed, and many hoaxers have confessed. The tools and techniques are simple, easy to replicate, and have been demonstrated publicly. In fact, demonstrations of crop circle creation have been performed for journalists, film crews, and curious observers in various countries over the years. The process doesn't require special training, just a bit of time, coordination, and effort. Geographical data also supports the hoax theory to an extent. Most crop circles appear in areas with relatively high population density. In England, they're often near main roads or cultural landmarks like Stonehenge. From a logistical standpoint, this makes sense. Hoaxers need easy access, ideally without being noticed, and placing formations near tourist sites ensures visibility. If people are going to go through the trouble of making something large and elaborate in a field, they usually want others to see it. Interestingly, those same data points can also be used to support an entirely different theory. If an unknown force were attempting to send a message to humanity, wouldn't it make sense to put that message where people could see it? Crop circle believers argue that locations are chosen precisely because they offer visibility, either from nearby roads or from elevated ground. Many formations appear in flat valleys between rolling hills, offering natural vantage points. Others are created on slopes, making them easily visible from the opposite side. Aircraft and drones are often used after the fact to capture photos and videos, but visibility from the ground seems to be a consistent factor. So the same facts, location, visibility, pattern complexity, can support two very different conclusions. This is where the crop circle debate becomes more than just a question of what is true, and begins to touch on how people interpret evidence based on their existing beliefs. For skeptics, the visibility and geographic patterns make perfect sense in the context of human activity. For believers, they serve as evidence of intentional communication, and both perspectives are, at the very least, logically consistent. That said, there are some data points that don't line up neatly with the hoax explanation. One of the most important ones is time. Many farmers, particularly in regions like Wiltshire, have reported crop formations appearing in very short periods. A field might be checked in the evening, and by the following morning, a massive and complex pattern has emerged. In several cases, observers claim to have had the field under near-constant surveillance, only for a formation to appear in a brief window when no one was watching. These are anecdotal reports, of course, and anecdotal evidence should always be treated carefully. But when multiple farmers and local residents share similar stories over years, it raises eyebrows. Some of the more recent formations have pushed the boundaries of complexity. These are not just simple circles or spirals, but intricate shapes that include mathematical patterns, mandalas, and even three-dimensional visual illusions when seen from the air. These designs often span hundreds of feet and appear highly symmetrical. Critics of the hoax theory ask, could a small group of people really create such large, complex, and precise shapes overnight? In total darkness? Without being spotted? Or leaving behind clear signs of entry? Supporters of the hoax explanation would say yes. They point to skilled groups of circle makers who have demonstrated the ability to produce highly detailed patterns using only boards, ropes, and planning. And they're right, some very impressive designs have been human-made. But even among those who study crop circles critically, there's an ongoing debate about whether every single example can be attributed to human efforts. Even among crop circle enthusiasts, there's an acknowledgement that many formations are faked. It's not a fringe belief. It's part of the wider conversation. The issue is that while fakes are well documented, not all crop circles fit neatly into the same category. Some don't show the typical signs of hoaxing. For example, most man-made formations leave behind broken stems, signs of human entry, or tools left behind. Sometimes, footprints are visible, particularly when the field has been recently watered or is muddy. Other formations, however, don't show these signs. Instead of being broken, the crops are gently bent. They lie flat in perfect patterns without damage to the plant heads or stalks. The bending often occurs at very specific points on the plant's stem, usually the lower nodes or knuckles of the plant. In these cases, the plants don't appear crushed or trampled, but rather bent, as if softened somehow before falling into place. This leads to another issue: the biological condition of the plants within the circles. Scientific studies, which will be covered in more depth later, have shown that, in some formations, there are cellular changes in the plants that don't happen when they're mechanically pressed. Enlarged nodes, split stems, and unusual growth patterns have all been documented by independent researchers and scientists. The question becomes, can a wooden board cause internal changes to a plant's cellular structure? Or is something else at work? At this stage, it's important to recognize that science, by its nature, should be open to questioning and testing ideas, even strange or fringe ones. But in the case of crop circles, the topic has often been met with dismissiveness rather than investigation. Academic articles and mainstream science publications often refer to believers with condescending language, and there's a tendency to downplay or ignore evidence that doesn't support the hoax theory. The general tone tends to be that anyone who still questions the official explanation is either misinformed or deliberately promoting pseudoscience. But this leads to a larger discussion about how science deals with uncertainty. In any genuine scientific inquiry, the presence of unexplained data should be a starting point for further research, not a reason to dismiss the subject entirely. If physical effects are observed in crops within certain formations that don't match mechanical compression, then those effects deserve further analysis, regardless of whether the broader phenomenon is popular or not. So far, the public debate around crop circles has largely focused on either believing they're made by aliens or dismissing them as pranks. But as more evidence has come to light, a third position has emerged: that some crop circles might be caused by a natural or unknown energy force. Not necessarily extraterrestrial, but not purely human either. For these, it's not a widely accepted idea, but it's one that's slowly gaining interest among researchers willing to look at the biological effects in greater detail. In summary, the confession of Bauer and Chorley gave us a valuable piece of the puzzle. It helped explain how some crop circles, maybe even many, came to be. But it didn't explain everything: the geographic distribution, the patterns of appearance, the physical condition of the crops, and the occasional lack of any signs of human activity continue to raise questions. These questions aren't necessarily proof of anything supernatural, but they suggest the topic is more layered than it first appears. As new formations continue to appear around the world each year, and as techniques for studying plant biology and environmental conditions become more sophisticated, the crop circle phenomenon remains a fascinating mystery. Part science, part art, and perhaps part something else entirely. The search for answers is far from over. As investigators looked more closely at crop circles, they began paying attention not just to the patterns in the fields, but to the condition of the crops themselves. This is where things became more complicated. While hoaxed formations typically showed signs of physical force, broken stems, crushed crop heads, or clear footprints, other formations revealed signs that did match up with the usual methods of human fabrication. Many of these observations began in the 1990 CS, when researchers decided to collect samples from both inside and outside the crop formations. One of the most prominent groups in this effort was the BLT research team, named after its founding members, John Burke, William Levengood, and Nancy Talbot. William Levengood, a biophysicist based in Michigan, studied hundreds of plant samples taken from crop circles and began noticing strange, consistent anomalies. Levengood's research focused on the microscopic structure of the plants. He examined both affected and unaffected stalks of crops such as wheat, barley, and canola. One of the first things he discovered was that the nodes, the knuckle-like joints that run up the stalks, were often stretched and swollen inside the formations. In some cases, the nodes had expanded up to 170% compared to control samples taken from outside the circles. Or these experiments were practiced in Sands and Adams, where there were 170% compared to control samples taken from outside the circles. This node expansion wasn't something easily explained by mechanical pressure, like someone stepping on the plants with a board. The bending of the plants also caught his attention. In formations that appeared fresh and showed no signs of human entry, the plants were bent over cleanly at the base without being broken. That was particularly strange because many of these crops, especially canola, are known to be brittle when dry. Canola, for example, will often snap when bent beyond 45 degrees in dry conditions, yet plants inside certain crop circles were found bent nearly 90 degrees without breaking. In addition to these observations, some of the most fascinating findings had to do with the condition of the seeds themselves. Levengood discovered that the seeds taken from affected plants inside certain crop formations behaved differently depending on the stage of growth at the time the formation appeared. If the plants were still early in development, the seeds often failed to form properly or showed obvious deformities. If the plants were more mature, the seeds were sometimes stunted or demonstrated lower germination rates when tested. But in fully mature plants, another effect was noticed: accelerated growth. In several cases, seeds taken from the center of a formation grew significantly faster than those outside it. They sprouted earlier, grew taller, and sometimes showed a 5-fold increase in growth speed. This change wasn't isolated to one crop or location. It happened across multiple samples, collected from different parts of the world. The further from the center the seeds were taken, the less dramatic the effect. Outside the formation, everything was normal. This gradient, stronger changes at the center, weaker changes at the edges, caught Levengood's attention. He realized that this kind of pattern was consistent with the Beer-Lambert law, a scientific principle that describes how energy is absorbed as it passes through matter. The idea is simple: the further you get from the source of energy, the less impact it has. This made him consider that electromagnetic energy, particularly microwave radiation, might be responsible. Another key detail was the discovery of burst nodes in many of the affected plants. These small ruptures on the stalks appeared to have been caused by internal pressure. According to Levengood, this could have happened if the moisture inside the plant rapidly turned into steam, expanding and bursting the outer tissue. This kind of internal superheating could, in theory, be caused by a quick, intense burst of microwave radiation. If microwaves had been used, they could have heated the water inside the plant's lower nodes faster than the plant could release the pressure, resulting in these explosive marks. Importantly, these burst nodes were not found randomly. They appeared most consistently on the second node below the seed head and in plants that were less flexible and more mature. Younger plant tissue, which is more elastic, showed fewer or no signs of bursting. That detail mattered because it suggested that the effect wasn't random or accidental. It followed a clear biological pattern. If hoaxers were responsible for these circles, they'd somehow need to replicate this highly specific form of plant damage without touching the plants in the usual physical ways. To support the idea that electromagnetic energy might be involved, Levengood and others pointed out that microwave technology is neither exotic nor outside the range of human capability. The kind of microwave bursts that could, theoretically, cause these effects are the same type used in household appliances and industrial tools. The real issue is how to deploy them. Hoaxers would need to create a portable microwave device capable of evenly affecting a formation that might be 100 feet wide or more, all while avoiding detection, leaving no equipment behind, and producing consistent effects across an entire crop formation. While it's technically possible, no one has ever come forward with a working device of this kind. And the idea of hauling a generator and custom-built microwave emitter into a field in the dead of night without leaving any trace stretches credibility. even for some skeptics. Especially in rural areas where private farmland is often guarded, such a mission would be incredibly risky and difficult to repeat consistently. Another puzzling effect was seen in the growth patterns of plants within the formations. As mentioned earlier, seeds taken from inside the formations often grew faster. But there was another detail: synchronization. In some crop types that usually grow unevenly due to genetic and environmental factors, the seeds from the formations would all sprout and grow at nearly the same rate. This kind of synchronization doesn't normally happen in wild or cultivated crops, and suggests that something altered the seed's usual development. If this were a hoax, then the people creating the circles would not only be pressing down plants in the dark, but somehow also managing to alter the biological development of seeds in precise, measurable ways. Critics of Levengood's research have argued that his work lacks peer review or proper replication, but the data itself remains largely unchallenged. Rather than refuting the findings, many scientists have simply ignored them or dismissed them on the basis of his involvement with a fringe subject. That dismissal is part of a larger pattern that often surrounds crop circle research. Instead of examining the specific effects or conducting independent tests, critics tend to focus on discrediting the researchers themselves. There's little discussion of the actual node enlargement, the burst effects, or the anomalous seed behavior. And yet, these are observable, testable features that anyone could, in theory, replicate if they had access to fresh crop formations and a well-equipped lab. To be clear, none of this proves the existence of aliens, advanced secret technology, or anything paranormal. What it does show is that not all crop circles are created equal. Some are clearly the result of human activity and can be explained as pranks or art projects. Others, however, show patterns of plant damage and growth changes that aren't consistent with simple board and rope techniques. These are the cases that raise difficult questions. Why do some formations appear so quickly, without signs of entry? Why do they feature plant damage that lines up with the effects of intense heat or electromagnetic exposure? Why do the seeds from these crops behave differently when tested? And why, after all these years, has there been so little effort from the mainstream scientific community to follow up on these findings with rigorous, independent investigation? The mystery isn't just about the patterns in the fields, it's about how we choose to look at the evidence, what we consider worthy of investigation, and what we're willing to admit we don't fully understand. In 2002, a major television network in the United States tried to put the crop circle debate to rest once and for all. The Discovery Channel aired a special that aimed to recreate the most puzzling features of crop circles using human technology. To do this, they brought in a team of 5 graduate students from MIT. These were smart, capable people with access to modern tools, and they were tasked with producing a crop circle that could mimic the so-called genuine traits identified by researchers like William Levengood. The criteria they were given were specific. First, their formation needed to produce elongated plant stem nodes. Second, it had to show signs of expulsion cavities, those little blown-out holes in plant stems that are believed to be caused by internal steam pressure. Third, the soil within the formation had to contain tiny magnetized iron spheres measuring between 10 and 50 microns, which had been found in real formations, but not in nearby unaffected soil. To meet these goals, the students built a microwave device and another machine to disperse iron particles. Their finished formation was presented as a success. The television program declared that all major characteristics of a real crop circle had been reproduced using purely human-made tools and techniques. On the surface, it looked like a decisive win for science. But a closer look reveals that the results were far less convincing than advertised. Viewers were never shown a close-up of the alleged expulsion cavities. Without magnified images of the nodes, there's no way to know whether the microwave device actually caused the same kinds of cellular damage seen in Levengood's research. For all the audience knows, the plant stems were only superficially bent or heated, not internally ruptured in the same way. The magnetized iron particles were another point of concern. In real formations, these tiny spheres are distributed in very specific, linear patterns. They don't simply appear scattered randomly. They follow a detectable arrangement. But the MIT students used iron shavings that were just sprayed around the site. The show never provided microscopic comparisons between the iron spheres found in genuine circles and the ones created by the students. Without that, the claim that this aspect was recreated holds little scientific weight. It's important to note that these students had access to resources that most hoaxers wouldn't dream of. They were part of one of the world's top engineering schools. They were filmed for a major media outlet with professional equipment, and even under those ideal conditions, they still didn't demonstrate with clarity that they had truly reproduced the anomalies found in authentic crop circle formations. More than anything, this event highlighted a problem that often comes up in controversial fields of study. Rather than engaging directly with the evidence, some groups or institutions prefer to create the illusion of resolution. The TV special gave the impression that the crop circle mystery had been solved by 5 students in a field. But under scrutiny, the methods and outcomes fell far short of proving anything definitive. This kind of superficial treatment is not unusual in debates where scientific consensus has already hardened. Once an idea is labeled as fringe or pseudoscience, it often becomes harder to question it without risking professional or social ridicule. This can create a feedback loop. Mainstream scientists avoid the topic because of the stigma, which then makes it easier to dismiss the topic as unworthy of attention. But ignoring uncomfortable data doesn't make it go away. As we've already seen, there are crop circle formations that continue to appear in conditions that don't favor hoaxers. Formations that show biological changes in crops, signs of rapid heating, and unusual soil characteristics. The findings of researchers like Levengood, while controversial, still stand, largely unrefuted in terms of their specific observations. The criticism has focused more on the researchers themselves than on the data they collected. Some of the most frequent critiques go like this. The researchers didn't prove causation. They were financially invested in the topic, and if their work were valid, other scientists would have picked it up by now. These points may sound reasonable at first glance, but they don't hold up under examination. Yes, correlation is not causation. That's true in all scientific fields. But when you find consistent patterns, such as plant node enlargement and seed abnormalities in formation after formation, those patterns deserve further exploration. They don't prove what caused the crop circles, but they do indicate that something worth studying is happening. Financial investment is a more complicated issue. Almost every well-known scientist has published books, given paid lectures, or appeared in documentaries. This doesn't automatically discredit their work. Jacques Cousteau made a career out of underwater exploration and shared it with the public. David Attenborough does the same for the natural world. The argument that a researcher's financial involvement invalidates their findings only seems to apply when the subject matter is already seen as fringe. And as for the claim that if the science were sound, others would have followed, this overlooks how academic and institutional science often operates. Controversial topics can become career risks. Researchers need funding, peer support, and publication opportunities to advance their work. If a subject is seen as laughable or too unconventional, even a well-designed study may never see the light of day in respected journals. The treatment of crop circle research shares many traits with how other fringe phenomena have been handled. Take unidentified aerial phenomena, for instance. For decades, governments and scientists alike treated the subject as fantasy. Anyone who suggested that some sightings might involve unknown technology or non-human activity was mocked or ignored. Yet today, government programs in the United States and elsewhere have begun to take the subject seriously. Congress has held hearings. Pilots and military officials have testified under oath. What was once unmentionable is now openly discussed. This shift didn't happen because the evidence suddenly appeared. It had been there all along. What changed was the willingness to look at it without fear of ridicule. A similar change could happen with crop circle research. But for that to occur, there needs to be more honest engagement with the data. Instead of hand-waving away the anomalies or focusing on the personal lives of the researchers, the focus should return to the formations themselves. If node elongation, burst cavities, altered seed development, and electromagnetic soil effects are truly present in some circles, then those findings need to be verified or refuted through direct examination. So far, no critic has successfully dismantled the actual lab results produced by researchers like Levengood. Instead, most of the argument against these findings is based on who conducted the research, not what was found. That's not how science is supposed to work. The data itself should be the starting point, not the reputation of the person collecting it. There's one more point worth noting. If crop circles are all hoaxes, then why has no one stepped forward to claim the more complex, biologically anomalous ones? Why are we told that pranksters passed up potentially billion-dollar discoveries, like methods to supercharge plant growth, just to play tricks on UFO believers? It's possible, of course, but it seems unlikely. If any person or group had truly figured out a way to enhance seed growth to that degree using electromagnetic energy, the agricultural sector would be revolutionized overnight. The fact that this hasn't happened, and that no one has demonstrated the ability to reproduce these specific biological effects on demand, suggests that we still don't fully understand what's going on in some of these formations. The debate around crop circles isn't just about patterns in fields. It's a mirror reflecting how we deal with strange or uncomfortable ideas. It shows how quickly some questions are dismissed when they challenge accepted views, and how difficult it is to separate genuine science from personal belief or cultural bias. There may be no clear answer yet as to who or what is behind the crop circles that continue to puzzle researchers and witnesses around the world. But that doesn't mean the question isn't worth asking. Until the evidence is thoroughly and fairly tested, the mystery remains.